Kinsley had spent her entire life watching her parents build their medical careers with the kind of focused pride that left very little room for anything outside it. Her father was a cardiologist. Her mother was a hospital administrator. Their world was built on credentials, titles, and the particular social architecture of medical professionals who had spent decades earning the right to be in certain rooms. Kinsley had chosen a different path, not a lesser one, just different. And in her parents' carefully constructed hierarchy of professional legitimacy, difference had always been a quiet source of disappointment. So when the invitation to their annual Hospital Foundation Gala was extended to colleagues, department heads, and select family members, and Kinsley's name was not on the list, the explanation came with the kind of careful language her parents had always used when they wanted a rejection to sound like consideration. They said it was a professionals-only event. They said the guest list was curated specifically for the foundation's donor relationships. They said Kinsley would find it dull. What they meant was that they weren't sure she fit. Kinsley didn't argue. She didn't ask to be reconsidered. She got off the phone, sat at her desk in her San Francisco office, and went back to work. The work that, as it turned out, every single doctor at that gala already knew about. Before that keynote speaker puts MedFlow on the screen, and every doctor in that room reaches for their phone, hit subscribe right now. Because the moment Kinsley's dad sees his daughter's company name in a room he told her she wasn't professional enough to enter is one of the most quietly satisfying moments in this entire story. New videos every single week, and this one is just getting started. Hit like if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you first. Drop a comment. Have you ever had your work speak for you in a room you weren't allowed into? Now let's go back to San Francisco, because Kinsley just got off that phone call, and she is already back at her desk. My name is Kinsley. I am 30 years old and I live in San Francisco, California. I grew up in a household where medicine was not just a career, it was the organizing principle of everything. My dad talked about cardiology the way other people talked about religion, with conviction, with reverence, with the implicit understanding that it was the highest calling available to a serious person. My mom ran a hospital foundation and treated institutional relationships like a second language she had been fluent in since birth. I had grown up watching both of them move through their professional world with a confidence and a belonging that I genuinely admired. I had also grown up understanding, quietly and early, that the path I was building was not the one that fit neatly into their picture. The annual Hospital Foundation Gala was one of the events my parents organized their year around: black tie, keynote speakers, donor tables, the particular electricity of a room full of people who had spent their careers building something they believed in. My mom chaired the foundation committee. My dad sat on the advisory board. They had attended every year for 11 years, and they talked about it the way people talked about things that confirmed their place in the world they had worked to build. In early September, my mom called to tell me the date had been set, the third Saturday in October, and she ran through the guest list with the energy of someone who had been working on it for weeks. I listened and waited for her to mention my name. Ethan got his invitation on a Tuesday, my mom called him first, which I knew because he texted me afterward with a photo of the formal card, slightly pleased with himself in the way second-year residents were pleased when they were treated like real doctors. He said Mom had said it was important for him to be seen in those rooms, that the relationships built at events like these were the foundation of a medical career, that the people who would write his future recommendation letters would be at those tables. He was 26 and still in the phase of collecting the validations that told him he was on the right track. I was genuinely glad for him. I also noticed that my phone hadn't rung yet. I called my mom 2 days after Ethan texted me about his invitation. I asked about the gala, kept it light, said I had heard the date, asked if I should expect something in the mail. Her answer came with the particular careful pacing she used when she had prepared what she was going to say in advance. She said the guest list this year had been curated very specifically around the foundation's donor relationships and the hospital's professional community. She said it was really an event for people actively working within the medical field, physicians, administrators, department leadership. She said the committee had kept it tight this year. She said it in the tone of someone explaining a reasonable policy rather than making a personal decision. I listened to all of it without interrupting. My dad got on the call briefly after my mom. I could hear the handoff, the small shuffle of the phone. He said essentially the same thing my mom had said, but with an addition at the end that neither of them seemed to register as significant. He said I would probably find it dull anyway, that it was mostly shop talk, medical politics, the kind of insider conversation that was engaging if you were embedded in that world and fairly tedious if you weren't. He said it helpfully, in the tone of someone doing me a favor by managing my expectations. He said he'd tell me all about it afterward. I said that sounded great. I said I hoped it was a wonderful evening. I meant the first part. I got off the call and sat at my desk in my San Francisco office and looked at my screen. My screen had 3 open tabs: a product update document, a hospital client onboarding checklist, and an email thread with my lead engineer about a workflow feature we had been building for 6 weeks. I had a deadline that week. I had a team of 14 people depending on clean deliverables. I had 2 hospital systems in the middle of implementation and a third starting their trial in November. I closed the call with my parents and went back to the product update document and picked up exactly where I had left off before the phone rang. Not because I was performing indifference, not because I was suppressing something that needed to be suppressed, but because the work was genuinely absorbing, and the work was genuinely mine, and the work did not require anyone's invitation to matter. The product update went live that Friday, on schedule, clean, the result of 6 weeks of focused engineering work by a team that trusted each other and communicated well. I sent the internal announcement at 9 in the morning, and the response from our hospital partners started coming in by noon. 3 implementation coordinators sent messages saying the new workflow feature had already been flagged by their floor nurses as significantly easier. One medical director sent a note saying his department had been waiting for exactly this functionality. I read every message and forwarded the highlights to my team with a note that just said, "Good work, all of you." Then I opened the onboarding checklist for the November hospital and started working through it. My parents' gala was 3 weeks away. I had already stopped thinking about it. MedFlow Systems had started 4 years ago as a single frustrated observation. Kinsley had spent 3 months consulting for a mid-sized hospital in Sacramento and had watched administrative error cascade through departments in ways that were entirely preventable with better workflow design. She had gone home after that contract, opened her laptop, and started building a solution. Not as a hobby project, not as a side income, as a company, structured properly from month 1, with a business plan and a development roadmap, and a co-founder she had met during her computer science degree who understood both the technical architecture and the healthcare operational context. 4 years later, MedFlow was operating in 211 hospital facilities across 31 states. She had 14 full-time employees and 3 active enterprise contracts. The peer review citations had arrived the way most significant things arrived in Kinsley's professional life. Quietly, without announcement, as the natural result of work that had been done carefully and consistently over time. The first citation had come 18 months ago, a study on administrative error reduction in mid-sized hospital systems that had referenced MedFlow's implementation data with specific statistical outcomes. The second had followed 8 months later in a healthcare management journal, a broader analysis of workflow optimization platforms in which MedFlow was described as among the most consistently effective tools currently in deployment. The third had come just 6 weeks before the gala, a clinical efficiency paper that named MedFlow's error reduction rate specifically in its opening paragraph. Kinsley had added each citation to her company's press page without making a personal announcement about any of them. The healthcare technology publication's top 10 list had arrived in her inbox on a Monday morning as a notification from her communications manager, a screenshot of the digital edition with MedFlow listed at number 4, alongside a note that said simply, "Congrats, this is a big one." Kinsley had looked at the listing for a moment, sent a thank you reply to her communications manager, and asked her to draft a brief social media announcement for the company accounts. Then she had called her lead investor, who had responded with the specific enthusiasm of someone whose financial confidence had just been publicly validated. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. After it ended, Kinsley had thought briefly about calling her parents. She had picked up her phone. She had set it back down. Then she had called her mentor instead. She called her parents on a Tuesday evening, the day after the top 10 listing went live, after the company's social posts had gone up, after her lead investor's congratulations had settled. She called because they were her parents and the news was significant, and some instinct that years of measured disappointment had not fully extinguished still reached toward them first when something real happened. Her mom answered with the warm, distracted energy of someone in the middle of something else. Kinsley told her about the top 10 listing, about what the publication was, about what it meant for MedFlow's visibility in the industry. Her mom said that was wonderful, genuinely, in the way she said things that registered as good news without fully landing as real. Then she asked if Kinsley had gotten Ethan's updated residency schedule yet. Dr. Carmen Reyes had been Kinsley's undergraduate advisor and had watched Medflow grow from a frustrated observation to a functioning company with the particular satisfaction of someone who had recognized the capability before the proof existed. She responded to the top 10 news the way significant news deserved to be responded to. She called within 20 minutes of the social post going live, asked 3 specific questions about what the recognition would mean for enterprise sales, said she had been sending the company's case study data to colleagues for months, and ended the call by saying she was genuinely proud in a way that landed completely differently from her mom's. That's wonderful. Kinsley had learned to receive the right responses from the right people and to stop measuring herself by the responses that were always going to be insufficient. During that same call, Dr. Reyes mentioned something she had been meaning to say for a while, that she had personally recommended Medflow to 3 separate hospital systems in the past 6 months. Not in a casual passing way, but in the specific deliberate way, she recommended things she believed in, with documentation, with her professional credibility behind it, with follow-up conversations when the initial recommendation needed reinforcing. She named the 3 systems. Kinsley wrote them down on her notepad and noted that 2 of them were already in various stages of the Medflow onboarding process. The third name on Dr. Ray's list was a system Kinsley recognized immediately. She circled it once on her notepad. It was the hospital that was hosting her parents' gala in 3 weeks. Kinsley looked at the circled name on her notepad for a moment after ending the call with Dr. Ray's. The hospital hosting the gala had reached out to Medflow 4 months ago through a standard enterprise inquiry. She had handled the initial conversations herself before passing the account to her sales lead. The relationship was progressing well. They had signed a case study release agreement 2 months ago, standard procedure, allowing Medflow to use their implementation outcomes in marketing and presentation materials. She had signed it on behalf of Medflow without a particular ceremony. She had not made the connection to her parents' event until this moment. She noted it clearly, without drama, added a line to the relevant client file, and returned to the product update document that was due by Friday. The third Saturday in October arrived the way Saturdays arrived when Kinsley was mid-project, as an extension of the week rather than a departure from it. She was in her San Francisco office by 8 in the morning, coffee from the place on the corner, the particular quiet of a weekend building that belonged entirely to whoever chose to be in it. She had a new hospital client onboarding that needed her personal attention, a large regional system in the Pacific Northwest, whose implementation team had specific questions about integration architecture that her sales lead had correctly escalated to her directly. She opened her laptop, pulled up the client file, and began working through the questions with the focused, unhurried energy of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing else she needed. Her parents arrived at the gala venue at 6:30, 30 minutes before the doors opened to general guests, which was the appropriate time for someone chairing the foundation committee and someone sitting on the advisory board. Her mom was in the specific mode she entered at events like these, warm, organized, moving through the room with the fluid confidence of someone who had built this world deliberately and knew every corner of it. Her dad worked the pre-reception the way he always did, handshakes, genuine questions, the easy authority of a cardiologist who had been attending these events long enough that the room felt like an extension of his professional home. They were good at this. They had always been good at this. This was exactly the world they had built. Ethan arrived at 6:45 in a rented tuxedo that fit almost correctly and with the slightly performative confidence of a second-year resident who understood the assignment, but was still assembling the ease required to carry it naturally. He found his parents near the foundation table and accepted a glass of water because he didn't drink at professional events yet, a rule he had made for himself that he thought made him look more serious and probably just made him look like he didn't drink at professional events. He shook hands when introduced, remembered names with the focused effort of someone practicing a skill, and generally did what he had come to do: be present, be visible, represent the family's continued investment in this world. He was doing fine. He just wasn't comfortable yet. The program moved to the keynote address at 8:15, after dinner, after the Foundation's annual report presentation, after the donor recognition segment that her mom had organized with the careful attention to order and emphasis that she brought to everything. The keynote speaker was introduced as the hospital's newly appointed chief of innovation, a woman named Dr. Sasha Park, who had come to the role from a background in clinical operations and healthcare technology consulting. She was precise and unhurried at the podium. She said she wanted to open with a case study, a real implementation story from within the hospital system over the past 8 months that illustrated the kind of operational change her department existed to support. The room settled into the attentive quiet of people expecting something relevant. Dr. Park presented the case study with the clean economy of someone who had given this kind of presentation before and understood that specific numbers carried more weight than general enthusiasm. She said the hospital had implemented a workflow optimization platform 8 months ago across 3 departments: admissions, surgical prep, and post operative care. She said administrative error rates in those departments had decreased by 31% in the first 6 months. She said nursing staff had reported a measurable reduction in documentation time that had translated directly into increased patient contact hours. She said physician satisfaction scores in the relevant departments had moved from the 42nd to the 78th percentile in 1 year. The room was paying attention. These were not incremental numbers. These were the kind of numbers that made department heads start calculating what they were currently leaving on the table. Dr. Park advanced her presentation to the next slide, and the company name appeared clean sans serif font, the logo Kinsley had approved in year 2 when the company was large enough to need one, the full name across the center of the screen. MedFlow Systems, San Francisco, California, founded 4 years ago, currently operating in 211 facilities across 31 states, cited in 3 peer-reviewed journals. Named in a major healthcare technology publication's top 10 list the previous month. Dr. Park said, "The platform responsible for these outcomes is MedFlow Systems, and I want to take a few minutes to walk through how the implementation worked." Several people in the audience reached for their phones simultaneously. The search queries were almost certainly identical. Kinsley's dad was seated at the third row table, Foundation Advisory Board positioning, center section, good sight lines to the stage. He had been listening to Dr. Park's numbers with the engaged attention of a physician who understood outcome data. When the slide changed and the company name appeared, he looked at it for a moment with the slight delay of someone who thought they recognized something but wasn't certain why. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He typed MedFlow Systems into his search browser. The company website is loaded. The About page had a founder profile, a photo, a brief biography, a summary of the company's origins and mission. He looked at the photo on his phone screen. Then he looked at the slide on the stage. Then he looked at his phone again. His wife was at the foundation table across the room and couldn't see his face. Dr. Park advanced to the founder profile slide, standard practice in a case study presentation, giving the company context and credibility through its origin story. The slide showed Kinsley's professional headshot on the left, the one her communications manager had updated 6 months ago, and a brief biography on the right. Computer science degree, 3 years in healthcare consulting. Founded MedFlow at 26 after identifying a systemic gap in hospital workflow design. Current operations across 31 states. The biography was 8 lines long. Dr. Park read 2 of them aloud before moving to the implementation timeline. Kinsley's dad was still looking at his phone. The photo on the website matched the photo on the slide, matched the daughter who had called him 2 weeks ago asking about the gala. Dr. Alan Whitmore had been in cardiology for 22 years and had been seated 2 tables from Kinsley's dad at foundation events long enough to know his family situation with the comfortable familiarity of professional proximity. He leaned across the table during the brief pause between slides and said, quietly, conversationally, the way people said things they assumed were already known, "Isn't your daughter in healthcare technology, out in San Francisco?" Kinsley's dad looked up from his phone. He said yes. Dr. Whitmore nodded at the screen where Kinsley's profile was still visible and said, "Is that her company?" Kinsley's dad looked at the screen. He looked at his phone. He looked at the screen again. He said, "I believe it is." He said it in the particular careful tone of someone choosing words while the rest of their mind was doing something else entirely. The presentation moved forward, but Kinsley's dad stayed on the founder profile page of the MedFlow website for considerably longer than the slide was visible on the screen. He read the full biography, the consulting background, the founding story, the current operational scale. He clicked through to the press page and found the 3 journal citations and the top 10 listing. He found the case study library and recognized the hospital name in the most recent entry. He found the client testimonials page, 12 hospitals, 12 named administrators or physicians, 12 specific descriptions of what MedFlow had changed in their operations. He read 4 of them before the person beside him said something that required his attention and he put his phone face down on the table. He did not fully return to the conversation. He was still processing what the phone had just shown him. During the cocktail break that followed the keynote, her dad was standing near the bar when Dr. Richard Warren approached him with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting for an appropriate moment to raise something. Dr. Warren ran the cardiology department at a regional affiliate hospital 40 miles away and had been in her dad's professional orbit for 15 years. He said, "I saw the MedFlow presentation. I've been using that platform for 8 months." Her dad said he had just been looking into it. Dr. Warren said it had fundamentally changed his department's administrative workflow, that his nursing staff had reclaimed an average of 40 minutes per shift from documentation, and that his error rate on surgical prep paperwork had dropped to near zero. He said, "Whoever built that understood clinical operations from the inside." Her dad said, "Yes, she did." Her mom was managing the foundation table during the break, the particular organized hospitality she was genuinely skilled at, making sure the right donors were talking to the right administrators, keeping the energy of the room moving in productive directions. The hospital's chief medical officer stopped by the table during the break, and her mom welcomed him with the ease of a practiced host. He thanked her for the evening and then said he wanted to mention that the MedFlow case study had generated more conversation in the room than any keynote they had featured in the past 3 years. He said 3 department heads had already approached him about beginning their own evaluation process. He said, "Do you know anything about the company?" The founder's profile looked almost familiar. Her mom smiled and said she would look into it. Ethan had found a workable rhythm at the event by the second hour. He had stopped trying to perform with ease and had settled into genuine listening, which suited him better anyway. During the break, he ended up in conversation with a senior resident from the host hospital named Dr. Priya Menon, who had been part of the MedFlow implementation team in the surgical prep department. She talked about it with the specific enthusiasm of someone who had experienced a before and after. She said the documentation process before MedFlow had been the single most complained about aspect of her department, and that after implementation the complaints had essentially stopped. Ethan asked who had built it. She pulled up the website on her phone and showed him the founder profile. Ethan looked at the photo. He went very still. Then he said, "That's my sister." Her dad stepped out through the side door of the venue at 8:52. She would know the time because she checked her phone when it rang and noted it with the automatic habit of someone who tracked her evening in project increments. His name on the screen was not a surprise. She had been aware. In the peripheral way, she was aware of most things she had already accounted for, that the case study was being presented that evening, and that the room it was being presented in contained her father. She let it ring twice, not to make a point, just finishing the sentence she was in the middle of typing to her implementation engineer. Then she picked up. She said, "Hey, Dad." His voice on the other end was different from its usual register. She noticed that immediately. Her dad's voice came through the phone slightly differently than usual, not emotional exactly, more like carefully assembled, the way a person sounds when they have been recalibrating something important and are still in the middle of doing it. He asked how her evening was going. Kinsley told him honestly. She was working through an implementation question with a new hospital client, the Pacific Northwest system she had been onboarding all week. She said it the way she said most things about her work, directly, without preamble, without translating it into language she thought he would find more accessible. She heard him take a small breath on the other end. She kept her eyes on her screen and waited for whatever he had called to say. He asked what the implementation involved, a question he had not asked before, not in that specific way, not with that particular quality of attention underneath it. Kinsley answered him directly. She explained the new client hospital's integration requirements, how MedFlow connected to their existing electronic health record system, why the architectural decisions her engineer had flagged needed her personal review, and what the onboarding timeline looked like from here. She spoke in her normal professional register, not simplified, not performed, just accurate. She could hear him listening in the specific way people listened when they were receiving information they realized they should have sought out earlier. She finished her explanation and waited. The Gala noise was faint but audible in the background of his call. Her dad paused for a moment after she finished and then said, "Kinsley, I need to tell you something about tonight." He said it with the careful pacing of someone who understood that what came next required a certain amount of assembly before delivery. He said the keynote speaker had presented a case study. He said the case study was about a healthcare technology platform that had been implemented in the hospital over the past 8 months. He said the results presented had been significant. The numbers he named were correct. She recognized them from the case study documentation her communications manager had prepared. He said the platform's name had gone up on the screen in front of every doctor and administrator and donor in the room. He said it was MedFlow, Kinsley. She said, I know, Dad. He went quiet for a moment after she said, I know. The particular silence of someone recalibrating the order of information they had assumed was arriving in sequence. He asked what she meant. She told him the hospital had reached out to MedFlow 4 months ago through a standard enterprise inquiry. The relationship had progressed through her sales team. They had requested a case study release 2 months ago, standard procedure, allowing the hospital to present MedFlow's implementation outcomes publicly. She had signed the release document herself, on behalf of the company, in a 10-minute block between two other items on her calendar that day. She had not connected it to the gala because the gala had never been something she was part of. It had simply been a client release. She had simply done her job. Her dad asked why she hadn't told them, about the company's scale, about the journal citations, about the top 10 listing, about any of it. His voice when he asked it was not accusatory. It was something quieter and more searching, the tone of a person asking a question they already partially knew the answer to and needed to hear confirmed anyway. Kinsley looked at her screen for a moment before responding. She said, I did tell you, Dad. I called you when the top 10 list came out. Mom asked about Ethan's residency schedule before I finished the sentence. She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, You told me the gala was for professionals. I figured my work could go without me. The gala noise filled the silence on his end. He didn't respond immediately. She could hear the ambient sound of the event through the phone, the particular acoustic texture of a large formal room during a break, the layered conversation and movement of 200 people who had just watched a presentation about her company. She let the silence hold. She did not fill it with reassurance or softening or the kind of gentle pivot she had spent years making when conversations with her parents reached edges that felt uncomfortable. She had stopped managing their discomfort at some point in the past few years, not out of coldness, but out of the simple recognition that the discomfort was doing necessary work, and interrupting it too quickly would only mean it needed to be done again later. She waited. He breathed. The gala went on behind him. Her dad said he should get back inside. The program was resuming. He said they would talk properly soon. He said, and she could hear him choosing the words carefully, reaching for something true rather than something easy. I'm proud of you, Kinsley. I should have said that a long time ago. She said thank you. She meant it not as a resolution, not as the conclusion of something that had been building for years, just as a true response to a true thing said by someone who had needed time to see it. She ended the call and set her phone on the desk beside her keyboard. She saved her work. She closed the implementation file. She closed the browser tabs one by one. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her San Francisco office, her name on a screen in a room she hadn't been invited to, her work already doing everything it needed to do without her in it.